Welcome to NFL Daily, where we totally forgot President's Day is a real holiday. I'm Gregg Rosenthal in the garage talking to my friend from across the country. Haven't spent a lot of time in real life, but I love his work on the Ringer Fantasy Football Show. It's Danny Heifetz, also a great writer. Danny, what's happened?
I'm good, man. How you doing? We're just getting ready for when the President's Day is just going to become the day after the Super Bowl, and then suddenly everyone's going to get to party on the Super Bowl like it's like there's no work the next day. So we're just kind of getting ahead of the curve.
Okay, people have mentioned that, and for that to happen, that means the NFL has to start a week earlier, though, too. Right, or they don't add the second bye week. But I keep thinking they're going to add a second bye week. That's been what it's been talked about a little bit. If you add an 18th game, and then do we start like Labor Day weekend?
I think so. I don't know. Before? I mean, one of us.
It'd be the weekend before, rather. It would cut into my U.S. Open tennis watching. It would be a little tricky.
One of us is, and a little more plugged into the NFL than me. So, but I do think that I know they love the starting after Labor Day, but I also know they want to make the Super Bowl even bigger. And the fact that you could make the Super Bowl like an actual holiday. I wonder if they kill the 2-week gap between the conference championships and the Super Bowl.
Yes.
To bring it back into a week. So that way you can add the 18th game, they make more money, add the second bye so the players don't get that mad, but then you collapse that into 2-week period into 1 week. And now the Super Bowl is the day before President's Day, which honestly is how it always should have been. It's kind of perfect.
I am with you. I get why it started that way back when. It's like a different media cycle, like gets everyone chance to really crank up the game for 7 days and everyone gets in position. We're like in a different time. Football is meant to be played weekly. Everyone does those tweets of like, oh, it's our first Sunday without football. Chris Long had a funny video about that. It's like, no, we just had one. The one Sunday before. Sorry, Pro Bowl. As my voice is already losing. I mean, New Orleans.
How are you doing? Yeah, I thought you were supposed to be immune to New Orleans by now.
I thought I was in better shape until starting to talk loudly to you right now. But Danny, Ringer Fantasy Football Show, one of the funniest, one of the best, most incisive, creative podcasts out there. Craig Horlbeck, Danny Kelly, everyone check it out. Danny on the Ringer. Had you on today because we're doing NFC East Offseason Preview. So I'm really excited to kind of dive into this portion of the offseason, the kind of the pre-draft, where draft is the sole focus after free agency portion. And I wanted to kind of preview like what each team needs now, like in the next month, free agency. We'll talk a little bit of draft, but the whole thing, like looking at the whole package, guys are going to get cut soon. That's already happening. The tag primer, we put that out last week. We talked about trades. So Danny's a Giants fan. We're going to put 10 minutes on the clock to kind of stop us from honking. We'll do a little bit of news halfway through the show as a break. Talk a little Travis Kelce, but let's actually put it on the clock. Eric, I don't know if we have a buzzer or what we're doing here, but 10 minutes, it'll stop us. And I want you to get us going with the Giants, kind of one big question we'll have each team to kick this off.
So first of all, good luck. I have an abstract concept of time, so we'll see if I just blow past this timer or not. We actually, shameless plug, Ringer Fantasy Football Show, we actually do the mock draft Oscars where we actually play Danny Kelly off with music if it goes too long, so you can do that with me here too. But my question for the Giants is very simply, who is playing quarterback for this team in 2025? Because right now it's like going to be Drew Lock or Tommy Cutlets. And then it's like, and again, because you mentioned, we're going to talk draft, free agency. The draft prep starts with free agency and who teams sign now, because ideally you can't do best player available in the draft unless you kind of like round yourself out in free agency. So I look at the Giants and I'm like, they have the third pick. At the end of the day, you can mock Abdul Carter to the Titans all you want. But if the Giants, if there's a world where they start Shedeur Sanders first pick and then the Browns take Cam Ward, the Giants have to acquire a quarterback that they could play this season in case they're not able to get one in the draft. So now you're looking at Sam Darnold. I mean, we can go through all the free agents, but to me, that's the defining question for the Giants is who, like, it's actually crazy to think how horrible the Giants' options at quarterback are.
It is so funny to me that Joe Schoen, who single-handedly ended the Hard Knocks offseason franchise. It really seems like no team's taken that this year. They already would have started. Is entering year 4. Year 3 is supposed to be the big year. It's kind of the year where Joe Schoen, when he was the assistant in Buffalo and in Brandon Beane, like the plan comes together and you get a good big push. But now we're year 4, the year after the big push year, which they obviously didn't push. And they literally don't have a quarterback on their roster. I've never seen that. I don't mean like they don't have a future quarterback. I mean, there's literally not one on the Giants roster right now. Now, technically, Tommy DeVito's an exclusive rights free agent. If they want to keep Tommy DeVito, they will and can keep Tommy DeVito. But it's not even like they have like a 5th round option as a backup or some veteran that makes sense as a third quarterback. Like there is no one. And to me, the question for them is just like, how big did they go on Stafford? They're the Stafford team. Why wouldn't they be the Stafford team? They make a lot of sense for Stafford, Danny. I actually think they're more turnkey than you realize. I actually don't think they need quite as much as these other teams that don't have quarterbacks out there. You put Stafford on this team, you're competitive. That's my take.
It's weird because, look, obviously the Giants are my team. I'm a Giants fan. And at the same time, every fan wants to see like, no one has it worse than us. And also we're closer than you think. So I look at the Giants and I'm like, this is the worst quarterback situation in the league because they don't have any. And we're still talking about Tommy Cutlets 2 years later. How is that a thing? And then, I mean, the fact that his agents kept it going this long. But then the flip side is, this is sacrilege to say, but looking at Washington's roster and looking at the Giants roster, I'm like, they kind of have a lot in common once you get past Jaden Daniels. You know what I mean? Like they actually and that's the thing is I'm biased, but the Giants, there's good bones to this fixer-upper house. You've got a left tackle in Andrew Thomas. You've got a top 3 defensive tackle in Dexter Lawrence. You've got I think an underrated defensive end in Brian Burns. And then you've also got Malik Neighbors at wide receiver 1. Like those are hard things to find. An elite receiver, an elite left tackle, an elite defensive tackle, a really like B+ to A- defensive end. Those are hard things to find. Everything else is a mess. And they need a quarterback. But yeah, if you threw in Stafford, I would talk myself into a Super Bowl run at 12-1. There actually was.
Nah, that's a little rich for me.
Well, I don't know if I'm allowed to mention certain things of the show. I actually put down.
You can say whatever you want.
FanDuel made a mistake and they had the Giants at plus 470. Sorry, 40. I can't even say the number. 400. I put $10 down. I win $4,700. If the Giants win the Super Bowl, which I was like, at that point, I'm just betting on a Stafford trade. But no, I mean, you're the objective one. Like, should the Giants trade for Stafford, or does that reek of desperation to you for a Dable, Joe Shane brain trust that just has to compete? And I think that's the tough thing there right now, where they have this like playoff mandate. And so, does it make sense for the Giants to go get Stafford, or should they just get a
It's both. It's desperate, and it makes enough sense for where they're at. Like, what would he cost? A second and a third, something like that. You mentioned they have a good situation otherwise in the great players that are there, but the rest of the roster is a mess. I would say their offensive line played a little better than people realized last year. Even some of the, like Kayvon Thibodeau wasn't a hit, but he's an okay starter. So your defensive line is an absolute strength. You had a good rookie class. You found a running back you can get going with Tyrone Tracy. In general, the rookie class, you got some DBs in the secondary. I made little categories for myself. I didn't want to give you too much homework, but last minute doing this, I was like, okay, what do they need? QB is obviously first. They need like some cornerbacks. They need wide receivers after, Neighbors, absolutely, and maybe some like defensive line, defensive tackle depth. But here's a win. I had a little category of like easy win and easy wins for each team in this part of the offseason. The easy win for them is like they don't really have many free agents I care that much about. Darius Slayton could be a good player for another team. At some point, they got to just give up the ghost. Like they never like him. And then after that, it's like Azeez Ojulari and Jason Pinnock. They are not losing much this year. Of those guys, like Slayton is the most likely to be gone, but they have $43 million in cap space. They do have an extra second round pick. An extra like a 5th round pick from the Leonard Williams trade. Like I think like, yes, it's desperate to get Matthew Stafford, but you're not going to do any better. So I would just do it.
No, yeah, I would kind of just do it too, because why not? But I agree. And again, the Giants, they have pieces in the trenches. The secondary, it's kind of a mess because actually Drew Phillips is their best cornerback now. They drafted Deonte Banks in the first round a couple years ago. Frankly, he's been borderline unplayable. He's one of those where if he was a 3rd rounder, they wouldn't be playing him. They have to play him because he's a 1st rounder. But I mean, Terry McLaurin's talking about how easy it is to beat Deonte Banks at the line of scrimmage and for touchdowns, like when he's mic'd up. It's unbelievable. So Thibodeau's been disappointing. Evan Neal was a mess. Deonte Banks, and suddenly, Joe Shane's had all these, 4 1st-round picks in his 3 drafts so far. Kind of missed on 3 of them. Like, it's not great. Ironically, the Dave Gettleman draft picks are holding up this roster between Dexter Lawrence and Andrew Thomas, which is funny to think about. But overall, I mean, Neighbors is fantastic. I don't know how much credit you get for taking Malik Neighbors, especially when, Penix looks like he might be good, and Bo Nix looks like he might be good. I don't know if those guys would be good on this roster, but that's the thing. It's like basically the Giants have to fortify themselves to what if they can't get a quarterback with that third pick in the draft? Because again, can't stress enough, as you said, they don't have one. It's February. They don't have a quarterback.
Well, it's kind of, what would you rather have? You know, your pick of the litter at number 3 overall, plus Stafford that you trade your second and maybe a future third for, or Shedeur Sanders at 3.
So I go back and forth on what the Giants should do with this third pick every day. And I know that, you don't necessarily want to go all into the draft right now, but the Giants, I think it's hard to separate because I think you have to reverse engineer from the draft backward. And I look at this, I'm between two, every day I waffle between two options. Just take a quarterback. You're high up in the draft. It's 10 times more important than any other position. And like, if it's a quote unquote bad, let's say a good class, you get a 50% hit rate on the quarterback, and it's a quote unquote bad class and you get a 1 out of 3. Still do it. No one ever knows. Like Justin Herbert went 6th. He's incredible. Like just take a Cam Ward, take a Shedeur, and if they're bad, whatever, you have to live with it. And next year you get the quarterback again in 2026 if they're so bad. Part of me hears that. And the other part of me is like, man, I don't know if Cam Ward or Shedeur could succeed in this Giants environment. And it's like, at least if you take Abdul Carter or you take Mason Graham and you have an elite defensive line, that's like an identity that fans can get around.
Yes.
And like you have something, building blocks. It's like how many teams have built something for one quarterback, given it to another, and it worked. It's like the Lions had something for Stafford, gave it to Goff. The Rams had something for Goff, gave it to Stafford. The Bucks built something for Jameis, gave it to Brady. Like you build in the trenches. That's my fear of taking Travis Hunter. It's like you go Neighbors, Hunter. How many teams are built that way? It's like I want big beefy boys on the trenches, and so I could go either way.
I think you also look. It's the positive and the negative of keeping the staff. Look, you got Dable, who I think can call plays. We're running out of time here.
-1 minute.
Okay, I didn't know if that was 30 seconds, 1 minute. We're getting used to this. Mike Kafka, who's getting interviews elsewhere. And the good thing about how bad the quarterback situation was last year, that anything is going to be an upgrade. Like Jacoby Brissett and one of these rookies would be an upgrade. The bad part of that equation is I think there's a very easy way for Joe Shane and Dable, if they do get Stafford, let's say, and make a couple good picks. It's like you get right back up to 8 or 9 wins. I don't know if this team is going anywhere, but then you're like re-signing Joe Shane and Brian Dable for another couple years because it's going to be easy for this team to show improvement. But I actually do think continuity was probably the easiest way for them to improve this year.
Underrated is that when you fire a coach, the GM can look for the coach. But if you fire a GM, the owner has to look for the GM, and they're like, I don't want to do that.
Yeah, the Jaguars, even though they have their coaches,
Exactly.
they're just like announcing finalists. All right, let's go to the Cowboys.
1-0.
I'll throw out the question for the Cowboys. Can the world, and by the world I mean the media, the Dallas fans, just kind of like general consensus, pressure Jerry Jones into doing something big? You know, after a year where, for whatever reason, he almost wanted to just push against the narrative that they had to do anything except wait until the very last minute to get Dak signed, to get CeeDee Lamb signed. Now Micah Parsons is up for a contract. Bill Barnwell and I mentioned possibly him being on the trade block. Will the Cowboys actually do something big this offseason? For instance, like trademark Micah Parsons, that to me, even though it would be getting rid of your best player, would be like an aggressive move. Or did they just kind of pick around the edges like they've been doing lately?
I mean, I think it's the right question because, I mean, again, Jerry Jones is older than Joe Biden. And I think that Cowboys fans finally realized that this year because I think there's something cracked in the facade of Dallas this year. I think that Jerry Jones, frankly, has been the Wizard of Oz for the entire time he's on the team. And I think Cowboys fans saw behind the curtain this year. Something about that. Jerry, for someone who says all these weird quotes to media, Jerry, the all-in quote has resonated with Cowboys fans, unlike any quote I've heard from any owner. All the Cowboys fans I know in my life, all the Cowboys fans I don't know that I hear from online, everyone just keeps repeating this all-in quote. And it's
Glory hole, I think, gets a lot of pop too.
Yeah,
That's resonated. Yeah,
it does.
He keeps going back to that. But yes,
a lot of pops in Glory hole. Yeah. So
I like his baggage.
Yeah, no, I mean, the Owls and Chickens, Google that one with Seth Wickersham. There's a lot of things going on. But anyway, Jerry, again, Jerry has been on a quest for two things. he wants to win a Super Bowl and get credit for it. Like he wants to recreate the 1990s Dallas where it's like, you know what? Jimmy Johnson got to walk in the locker room and be like, how about them Cowboys? And it's like, Jerry wanted to do that. He wanted the credit, but he also doesn't want to spend money. Jerry wants as much attention and eyeballs for as little money as humanly possible. That's why instead of making football decisions, he makes business decisions. He's a marketer. He's a salesman. They get the Dak Prescott extension done on the Sunday morning of week 1 so he can get it on the pregame shows for free. He looks at all this as free media. That's what it is. It's advertising. He doesn't have to pay for it. That's how he looks at the news. So the Micah Parsons thing, he doesn't look at it as a football decision, in my opinion. Jerry looks at it as, all summer they're going to talk about the Dallas Cowboys until Micah Parsons' deal gets done. Why would we do the deal early? Because then they'll stop talking about it. That's why it gets Dak and CD done late in the year. And so that to me is the question is Jerry going to start treating this like a business that he just is trying to get eyeballs, or he's going to treat it like a football team? Because he hasn't treated it like a football team in like 12 years.
Okay, some little facts about their offseason. Not much cap space. Right now, they're actually over the cap by a couple million. You know, you can restructure, you can move money around, you can make cuts. Every team has the option to do that. The Cowboys have done it a little less than others, but certainly they will for a little while. They're missing their 4th round pick because they gave it up for Jonathan Mingo. Whoops.
A year after they gave up the 4th for Trey Lance.
Couple easy wins. They have 2 free agents, which will make my top 101 in Rico Dowdle and Kevontae Turpin. Those are guys that are worth more to the Cowboys to me than they probably would be for another team. Just give Rico Dowdle 2 for $10. He'll take it. Like he's a good enough running back, and then move on from worrying about that position. And then Turpin is your second most explosive offensive player and one of the best return guys in the league. Just like take care of those early. And then I have a category like likely gone from the team. Brandon Cooks is likely gone. Zach Martin is probably going to retire and open up some cap space for them. And then Osa Odigizua had a really nice contract year. He's in my top 10 free agents, which is crazy. It's such a bad class, but he's a good free agent, and they're going to have to say goodbye to him because I just don't think they're going to want to have to pay him.
But to your point, though, I think that actually accentuates the problems because, I mean, he's one of the Cowboys' better defensive linemen. He's one of their better defensive tackles. They need defensive tackle. This is a team that can't stop the run. It's one of the worst run-stopping teams in the league. They're going to lose one of their best defensive tackles. They need to add to D-tackle as soon as he leaves. I was impressed you pronounce. I always call him Osa. I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but as soon as Osa's out of there, they need that. And the same with running back. Even if you bring back Rico Dowdle, I would argue this is probably one of the 2 or 3 worst running back rooms in the league. And that's if you bring Dowdle back. They have to dip into running back in this draft, and they're going to have to dip into defensive tackle because you're not going to be able to replace him. So I think they're already kind of flat-footed in that they're already doing exactly what you're not supposed to do, which is they need to hit picks in the draft. They need to hit running back. They honestly should take 2. They need a D-tackle, and then they also need a bunch of other stuff. I mean, inside linebacker, they're cursed because DeMarvion Overshown looked great, but he had that horrific injury. And so now you've got one Sean Lee to Leighton Vander Esch to Overshown where that position's cursed for them. But then, you know, you still need like receivers behind CeeDee Lamb. Like they need a lot.
Their roster looks terrible right now, which is I disagree on the running back thing. I think if you bring Dowdle back, you're fine. He was good. He was good enough. And everyone says you can find running backs in the draft. Like the Cowboys can't. They keep trying. Like Malik Davis, Deuce Vaughn is there. They don't really have any.
It's fun. That was a baseball pick where it's like the 20th round. You just take some scout's son. They just took the guy's son from the guy. That's not. You can't do that in the 7th round.
Like they need to go back to. They got to look at like what the Eagles are doing. So to me, their biggest issues. I mean, they have issues everywhere. Offensive line, defensive line, especially as you mentioned, and then the weapons beyond CeeDee Lamb. That's like a lot. Like, who is their second best defensive lineman? If you count Micah Parsons as a defensive lineman, which I will, he's basically an edge. Who is their second best defensive lineman right now? They have DeMarcus Lawrence is going to be a free agent. Chauncey Golston, who actually played a lot for them, is a free agent as well. It's probably Marshawn Nealon, who's coming off a big injury, but they don't really have anyone. So they need so much depth, and then they drafted a couple offensive linemen last year. We'll see if Tyler Guyton works out at left tackle. He had a rocky rookie year, but that happens at tackle. They like Cooper Beebe, who's a center, but they only feel like great, I would think, about Tyler Smith on the offensive line. So That's like a lot. I think one of the big decisions, actually sneaky, is do they bring DeMarcus Lawrence back? He's one of those veterans that's out there. It would feel very weird. If I'm DeMarcus Lawrence, I would rather just end my career in a different uniform. But maybe you're like losing endorsement money down the line if you leave.
Jerry loves him. Jerry loves DeMarcus Lawrence. I think he'll be back. And
He's
I don't know
great.
why. Jerry loves him. And so I think also they just need pass rushers too. The offensive line I'm not as worried about, but again, it's still a question mark. But I think that, look, they've proven they can develop offensive linemen. I know it's a different time, different place, but like Guyton, I don't know. He was supposed to be young and he was kind of like cookie dough coming in. And it's like, okay, it's not like Tyron Smith was lighting the world on fire as a rookie. And then he's probably going to go to the Hall of Fame. So, I mean, Tyler Guyton at left tackle, I'm not that worried. The development on the defensive side of the ball, like Mozzie Smith has been really disappointing at defensive tackle. He's like the ultimate like traits guy that has not really translated like the absurd athleticism. I think he was number one in Bruce Feldman's freaks list. Like that hasn't translated at all. But the overall point though is the roster kind of matches what the overall criticism of Jerry Jones is. Top heavy veneer of talent and sex appeal. Ooh. And underneath you pull off the layer and it's just like, it's all rotted wood. Like the foundation is totally cracked. It's like you got CD, you got Dak. And again, we're still talking about hamstring avulsion. You look into what that means. It sounds like barbacoa. It's like they pulled off the bone and it's married. Like it's not really exciting. So you got Dak coming off this weird injury, CD, Micah Parsons, who hasn't have a deal yet. That's three of the other 50 guys. Tyler Smith, I'll give him 4. Crazy question marks everywhere. And that's assuming that I'm saying where I'm like the offensive line will continue to develop. And still, it's just the ceiling on this team is really low.
That's why I actually don't think it'd be that crazy to get the mother load for Micah Parsons if you could do it.
But that to me, it's so un-Jerry-like.
Yeah, it really is. But otherwise, as Bill Barnwell pointed out on Lasso, you're paying like $120 million or whatever it's going to be to 3 players after you weren't that good paying them half that or way less a couple of years ago. Whereas it's very on Jerry, but maybe they could impress upon him. Because I look at this roster, I think there is a route here where the offseason doesn't go well, where they're like predicted to go coming fourth, like behind your Giants and Matthew Stafford next offseason. You got any more hot Cowboys take before we take a break?
I just really want to reiterate that I mean what I said, and I'm not being hyperbolic. Jerry cares more about attention and winning in that order. And until that changes, this team they're not worth talking about that much.
It's one of those teams that the more I looked at, I was like, man, this is more funky. Like then I realized, like, what's the part of the team that you actually feel pretty good about in terms of weapons? It's Lamb. The second weapon behind him is Jake Ferguson, probably. And your second receiver right now is Jalen Tolbert. We mentioned like the lack of depth on the defensive line. You've got some good players in the secondary. Jordan Lewis, though, is a good player for them. That's also a free agent. They sneaky had a lot of free agents in my top 100. Zach Martin, Dowdle, DeMarcus Lawrence, Odigizua, and Jordan Lawrence. We're going to take a quick break, do some news on the other side, and wrap up the NFC East Offseason Preview.
0.
And one of many reasons I wanted Danny Heifetz on this show was like he was going to bring just a lot of energy, pick me up here on a Monday morning where I gotta be real with the listeners here. We had to stop down at one point during that Giants preview because I couldn't speak. Like the Super Bowl took more out of me than I expected, Danny. Like I had to go inside, get some water, like recollect myself. It was a lot. Even if you weren't Travis Kelce, like losing that Super Bowl, it seems like it took a lot out of a lot of people.
You know, I don't know if you've seen Lord of the Rings, but I think that one's like, I can't carry the ring, Mr. Frodo. I can't carry the show, but I can carry you. But no, I just that's how Danny Kelly and I started doing the fantasy football show at the beginning. Was like I didn't know what I was talking about, but I had a lot of energy, and they just threw me and Danny Kelly together, and like I wonder if on average, they'll have like a normal amount of energy, and that's kind of how it goes sometimes.
Well, and you're both named Danny, which you guys leaned on a lot early, but
a little too much. Fantasy Football Podcast turns out to be a terrible name for a show because you Google it and Google thinks you're wrong.
It is really funny to think about. I don't know if that was a bad name, but I do like the Ringer Fantasy Football Show. Although right now it's draft season, and they also are the Ringer Draft Show.
We changed the name of the show during the season because there's 5 million podcasts. Literally, there's 5 million podcasts in the world, and we're the only one who changes their name during the year. So it's probably because everyone else is wrong, right? There's no way we could be wrong about that being a bad idea.
So I listened to the New Heights podcast. This is not a flex or trying to be a hipster. It was the first time I'd listened to it, and it was really good. This would logically be a compelling one to listen to. Travis Kelce talking about losing, and what struck me, first of all, is that I'd be shocked if he's not retiring. Just listening to that, he used the words, the weight of the season and what they've accomplished and what they're trying to accomplish. It can either motivate you or drive you crazy. And this season, it kind of drove him crazy, and he was as down as he possibly could be about it. There was a report, Danny, from The Athletic, that they needed an answer from Travis Kelce by March 14th. And that's when free agency started. And I looked at the cap hit and all this sort of thing, and I was thinking it's going to be sad for the Chiefs. It's obviously sad for Travis Kelce. Every great career has to end. But it actually could help the Chiefs out. They get $17 million in cap space. It's not they would keep Travis Kelce. I don't know if they try to renegotiate his contract or somehow lessen that hit, but I don't think you want Travis Kelce on the books for like $19 million in salary cap space. And I really think it's gonna end in a retirement, and you felt for him. And what you realize, I think this is true as a fan, but obviously it's true as a player. Brady talked about this too, is like, man, it hurts way worse to lose in the Super Bowl, I think, than it does in the divisional round in the NFC or the AFC or NFC championship game.
There's a reason losing Super Bowls destroys teams. And, there's a reason the Super Bowl hangover of like losing the game, it destroys teams. It destroyed the 49ers. It hurt that Eagles team like the year before this year. And I think Deebo Samuel, I forget, someone on the 49ers team just came out and said it. It's like, yeah, everyone's just depressed the whole year. Like it's your entire life's aspirations are dangled in front of this collective group of 200 people. And it's ripped away from you right as it's in your hands. And so, yeah, it does things to you, especially when you have those lofty things of a three-peat, knowing you'll never get back to the three-peat, all these things you envisioned to yourself, never going to happen. I think with Kelce specifically, every player says this, like if you make the decision in February, you want to retire. Like if you, like Tom Brady said this, like Tom Brady, the reason he came back was he's like, I made the decision in that 2-week aftermath of the season where it's like the weight of it crushes you. I think if Kelce decides and lets the Chiefs know in February, like he's gone, and if he waits right up to that deadline when it really like gets a little real and you're getting back into like your workout routine, that when you start to miss it, I think he might come back just because you don't want to know if you want to go out that way. But I think he probably should retire. He should go out this way. Like he has this wonderful, it would have been better if he won, but you have this incredible off ramp for your career. You don't want to go into the season where everyone is going to be talking about him as the weak link. He doesn't have it anymore. And it's like cool to go out and impress the doubters, but you don't want to have a season where you're like, actually the haters and doubters were right. Shout out to the haters and doubters.
I just think he wasn't having as much, like from the sound of it, I don't know how fun this season was for the Chiefs. The thing that really hit me was him talking about the weight of like what they were trying to accomplish. Because I think the weight after you win one is really heavy that next year. And so only a few teams ever even know what that's like, of the weight the year after that. And then to end how it ended, and he was really kicking himself, being like how he was trying to do too much, and he wishes, he had known how to lead better in that scenario because he had been going through it before. And that was getting crushed in a Super Bowl. And I think the way they lost that Super Bowl made it even worse. Just they use the words like humiliating and all that stuff it's just brutal. And he was very eloquent, I thought, about how brutal a game that it comes for everyone. Like it can just come for you so quickly. I'll transition just a little bit to some offseason news before we get back to the previews. Some cuts. We're already into the cap cut season. So like the Dolphins are cutting Raheem Mostert, Kendall Fuller, some pretty good players, free up like $13-14 million in cap space. The Steelers cut Preston Smith. That was $14 million in cap space. They're up to 50. We're just at that time of year where there's going to be a lot of cuts. And so
spring cleaning.
Yeah, there's 8 teams right now over $50 million in cap space. There's way too much cap space. This is one of the things I always bang on about. And then another just item I want to get your thoughts on. The Texans hired offensive coordinator Nick Caley. It's just something we hadn't hit on the show yet. And I don't know where you were in the great CJ Stroud wars of 2024 and maybe what Caley means for them. He was a guy who's been on this Rams staff that everyone's wanted, that he supposedly turned down multi-million-dollar deal from the Patriots last offseason to become their offensive coordinator. He's been a really hot name that's been picking and choosing, and the Texans get him to really shepherd CJ Stroud in the next phase of his career.
So I'm a big believer that Bobby Sloak was the problem for the Houston Texans. I think, frankly, they were really poorly coached, and I thought the play calling was really bad. And I don't mean it. I think Bobby Sloak, he's a really nice guy. I don't mean any shade to Bobby Sloak, but the reality is they were not well coordinated on the Houston Texans last year. They were uncoordinated as a team. The offensive line didn't know who to block. They had bad technique. They didn't understand their assignments. That's kind of the whole job. The play calling, the sequencing, frankly, was horrific. They couldn't really run the ball the way they wanted to outside of the Dallas game where they did a lot on Monday Night Football, which I actually think preserved. I think they'd actually have a worse reputation if not for rocking Dallas on Monday Night Football or Sunday Night Football. I forget. But if you look overall, I believe, and I could be wrong on this, but I believe nobody had more third and longs than the Texans last year, except the Cleveland Browns, who were one of the worst offenses ever when Deshaun Watson was playing those 6 weeks. Like the Browns and the Texans are the most third and longs. It's CJ Stroud. The whole thing in the modern NFL is not to put your quarterback in that. And the entire Texans offense to me was CJ Stroud bailing them out of third and long. And then if he could do that for a drive, they'd score. And if not, they couldn't. And so, Bobby Sloak had to go. I think that I've seen it with my own eyes. CJ Stroud's good. I don't want to hear anything else about it. It's funny that Bryce Young outperformed him last year. But the reality is, when I watch the Texans and it's a Rorschach test, I do not think, man, CJ Stroud got worse. I think, what is going on all around this offense? You know what I mean? And so I am very bullish, and I think that a lot of the Texans hype from 2024, I am going to buy the dip on that for 2025.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of when the Bills immediately got better with Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott, took a little step back in year 2, and then year 3, they actually were truly a better team, a little more stable ground underneath them. Obviously, that's when Josh Allen improved, but I think CJ Stroud is going to improve. I think it's a great hire, and the way they talk already, D'Amico Ryans is very excited about him. And there was a report, I believe it was from ESPN.com, that Ryans went around and asked some of the players before he made this final decision. It's about getting rid of Sloak, and what did you think? And there was not a lot of defending of Bobby Sloak from the players. There was one player who was like, yeah, we didn't know what the F was going on. We honestly didn't know what the F we were doing on a play-to-play basis. The Jaguars also hired their offensive coordinator, a young man by the name of Grant Udinsky, who had 1 million interviews this offseason, is in his 20s, was under Kevin O'Connell in Minnesota. So that's an interesting hire, but Liam Cohen's an offensive coach, so it's interesting. That's the job he ended up with. Liam Cohen is supposed to call plays there. Just something to watch. Meanwhile, they're on their finalists for their GM, which is they're just doing everything backwards.
Wait, I couldn't believe that. Okay, you have been doing this longer than me. I was looking through headlines this morning and I saw that and I was like, isn't the combine next week? They don't have a GM. What's the latest you could remember a GM? Because there are teams that fire the GM after the draft, like the Bills have done that. A lot of teams are like, oh, we want to keep the board.
McCagnon did that, right? Didn't they fire McCagnon after the draft?
Yeah, they let Mike McCagnon give out $100 million guaranteed, which had never been done before, and then they fired him after the draft. But I get that because at least it makes sense. Hey, they've done all this work on the draft. What is and you fire him after the draft in May. What is the latest you can remember a general manager being hired? Because I don't remember a team going into the combine without a general manager.
Yeah, I'm sure they'll get one by next week, but it essentially
his key fob, and then either he's going to get a plane ticket to Indianapolis. Is he going to go to Indianapolis? Is he going to go to Jacksonville first?
Tony Baselli is essentially their GM, which is weird, like their radio announcer. I mean, they've changed their mind 4 times this offseason. First, they're keeping Trent Baalke, then they're not keeping Trent Baalke, but essentially Liam Cohen is running the team, which is it's a risk. Let's go back to the NFC East offseason preview. I do want to get through all these teams. That's one of the reasons I wanted to do this show. I think it's good to give each team a juicy 10 minutes here. So put the commies on the clock. You asked me a big question here, Danny, about the Commanders.
So my question for Washington is just, can they retool this entire team on the fly again? Because if you look at this Washington team, They retooled the whole thing from the number 2 pick to the final 4 in one offseason. That was cool. They got to do it again. They have more than 24 free agents, including a lot of the contributors. I could go through this list if you want. I have the whole thing. But in the short, do you think that they can just retool the whole thing again and just be a contender just like that?
It's kind of the flip side of doing all these prove it 1-year deals with veterans who immediately raise the floor. It almost worked too well, and now you're having to make decisions on, like, do we bring these guys back or not? But I think they sort of had their cake and eat it too, because you had a great rookie class. You have not just Jaden Daniels, but you have Sanders still. You have some guys that you can build around for the future, and you got to have immediate success. It's just the expectations are now going to be so high. But yes, like, what would you put highest on their needs? Because they do, unlike some of the teams we're talking about, have almost infinite amount of cap space to address these needs. $75 million right now, and you can probably create even more if you want.
But who cares about cap space? You just said it earlier. Cap space it's not the NBA. It's overrated because, again, I'm going to read some lists to you. I'm going to let you pick what you think is their biggest need. Bobby Wagner, who's going to be 35 this year, led them in tackles and played almost 100% of snaps. You kind of need Bobby Wagner back. So I think they'll do that at middle linebacker.
He's a free agent, yeah.
Yeah, so he's a free agent.
I actually might let Bobby Wagner go. Like, it's not going to get better. If you watch that NFC Championship game, the game plan was essentially Bobby Wagner. We're going to take advantage of you.
Well, and that's the point, though, is they have a lot of stuff like that. Dante Fowler led them in sacks, and then he's a free agent.
Okay.
Washington has 2 receivers under contract next year. 2, Terry McLaurin and Luke McCaffrey. They have 1 tight end under contract next year, the rookie Ben Sinnott. Washington, 8 players caught a touchdown for Washington last year. 8. 6 of the 8 are free agents. So you have that is a huge problem. They really only need to stick with, 4 of their 5 offensive line positions could be upgraded. They don't have to. But like, you have Sam Cosmi at guard. He tore his ACL late in the season, so they're going to have to do that. Brandon Coleman's still at left tackle for you. Like, is that what you want long-term with Jaden Daniels? So again, Olamide Zaccheaus was a nice find, but like, is that what you want at slot? You do not have a number 2 receiver for real. Again, it's just McCaffrey and McLaurin under contract. You don't really have a ton of edge rushers under contract. Cornerback is huge concern. Sanders still is the man out of Michigan. I love him. But like, after that, you cannot count on Marshawn Lattimore to play or contribute. They don't have a ton of cornerbacks. And that's the thing with this Washington team. They made the championship for basically half because of Jaden Daniels and half because of this crazy team of like 22, 24 1-year deals gelled.
Yes, and some of the rookies. Coleman was a rookie, so as a 3rd-round rookie, I think you can expect that position's okay, and that you got to hope that he improves. You can't upgrade everywhere all at once. Plus, you probably need another tackle, a right tackle. So the offensive line, like, I'm okay with. Jaden Daniels, I'm okay with. The backfield, you're right. Everywhere else, you kind of need issues. All right, easy win category for me. The easiest thing to do is bring back some of the guys that helped you that shouldn't have a huge market. So Zach Ertz, you said, okay, the guy's like, no one's going to be bidding crazy for Zach Ertz. What's Zach Ertz going to cost? Just bring Zach Ertz back. Kick the can a little bit there. Mariota was the best Mariota I've ever seen. Bring him back as your backup. I mean, that was the best version of Mariota I've ever seen. He
looked like Randall Cunningham in that Panthers.
I'm almost a little worried that some other team will give him a nice contract. Then you're having a problem. Noah Igbenogany actually at cornerback was like the next best Igbenogany I'd ever seen. Yes. And so there is a concern that some of these guys, you mentioned Fowler, there's De'Ami Brown could get a nice free agent contract. Jeremy Chin, who you kind of raise their value, that other teams are going to come over the top, and that's going to make it tricky. And yet, I don't know. I have a lot of faith because they hit so many winners last year. I do think they are a team that will make a monster like splash type of move. So if that's Myles Garrett, I could see that. If that's Trey Hendrickson, I could see that. Charvarius Ward is a guy that was with Adam Peters in San Francisco. I was trying to think of like where are the connections there with 49ers. Maybe Debo as a 2nd or 3rd receiver. That's not going to cost much. Like, that's where cap space can help. Oh yeah, Debo, you want us to overpay you like a little bit? Sure. Like, let's bring in Debo for like a 4th-round pick. You're not going to have to give up much for him.
I think this is the Debo Samuel team for a couple of reasons. One, obviously Adam Peters was in San Francisco in the front office. That always helps grease the wheels. And 2, it just makes sense. Like, because my short pitch on Debo, He had pneumonia last year. I understand he looked out of shape. It's because he was out of shape. Like, if you ever had pneumonia and you're a normal person, it takes you a month to get your win back. You want to reach 100th percentile NFL athleticism, it takes a month. So I really think if you take out that 6 weeks after you had pneumonia, I'm still a believer in Debo, and he makes so much sense in this Kingsbury offense. But do you think they should get Myles Garrett? Like, do you think Washington give up 2 firsts and change for Myles Garrett?
I don't think it's a bad. Yeah, people get too caught up in like, are they trying to win now? Like, just try to get Myles Garrett on your team. I don't know. 2 firsts is a lot, but now that first is a super late first this year. So you got to see what the market is. Maybe all these edge rushers, possibly Max Crosby, Hendrickson being available drives it down. I do think they're a team that can go big. Now, they don't have the pick that they sent away for Marshawn Lattimore. I think you got to count on Marshawn Lattimore. I disagree with you there. Like, they made that trade thinking that's a 2-year deal. You got to just hope he stays healthy. He was a little better at the end of the season. They also could trade Jonathan Allen. Bill Barnwell mentioned that on our show. That makes some sense to me because you have a couple of defensive tackles. That opens up even more money. But you're right. Wide receiver, like tackle, edge, pass catchers. These are all like major needs for the Commanders. So they are high on the list of teams I think that are going to be aggressive. We'll get to the Eagles next, but I think these might be 2 of the more aggressive teams this offseason are actually the Eagles and the Commanders in this division.
What are the chances that the 2025 Washington Commanders are last year's Texans, where everyone's like, oh my God, CJ Stroud, darling, you come in, and then there's a lot of questions. Now, I think Jaden Daniels, frankly, had a better rookie year than Stroud, but I think that you go from that last place schedule to the second place schedule, and all these auxiliary pieces around him aren't as good, and then suddenly high expectations, and again, happiness just expectations minus reality. And I do kind of worry that Washington, it won't be quite as smooth in 2025.
And you might get the year 2 Cliff Kingsbury effect. I think it'll be less about Jaden Daniels and more just about the Commanders. I think Commanders fans, they got to understand that if they win 10 games next year and they lose a tiebreaker and don't make the playoffs, or they win 9 games next year, that's fine. It's all like that's part of the progress. All right, let's wrap up with the Eagles. My big question: what is the Howie did it again trade? Because they're going to make one. This is sneaky. I'm not going to answer that question, but I am going to give you context of why I'm asking it. This is sneaky a team that is actually in a push your chips in the table type of offseason because they've signed so many of their best players long-term already. A.J. Brown, Devonta, Jalen Hurts, Landon Dickerson, like so many of their best players are actually on huge contracts, and they're in this very short window before they're going to pay all the rest of their next best players already, which is like Jalen Carter and Cooper DeJean and Quinyon Mitchell and Nolan Smith. The one guy I could come up with this year that they'd give an Eagles-type deal in June, no one notices, is Cam Jurgens. But other than that, they don't really have that many guys to pay. And they have a lot of upcoming free agents, so they're going to feel like they need to replace. What is the Howie did it again type of move? I think he's going to do something big.
I mean, it's Myles Garrett, right?
Yeah, let's go.
I know that sounds insane, but I do think what the Eagles have been impressive at is knowing when to go bargain basement on something and knowing when to go all the way. And I think they don't get stuck in no man's land at positions a lot. And I know that sounds insane, but I kind of do wonder if the Eagles just kind of pull trig because, the idea of like, it reminds me, going from Miles Sanders to Saquon also kind of reminds me of going from Milton Williams and Josh Sweat to just adding Myles Garrett into this team.
Yeah, so you mentioned Milton Williams. It's crazy. I have my preliminary 101 top free agents ready to go. Josh Sweat, Milton Williams are in my top 7. There's just not that many good free agents. Mekhi Becton is a free agent. Zach Bond is in my top 10 too. Between those guys, I talked about it a little bit with Bo Wolf last week. You also have Dallas Goedert, who they could potentially move on from, or Darius Slay, who they could potentially move on from. Like, they have to figure out who they would want to prioritize. My guess is Bond will be back. The guys who I think will get big money elsewhere are probably most likely Josh Sweat, Mekhi Becton. Would it shock me if they found a deal with Milton Williams where actually he gets paid a ton of money? No, because he's a really good young player and they love playing good young players. But the other thing they could do is just go big at a different position. Like it could even be like a tight end trade that you don't see coming, or like an interesting, I don't know, defensive line trade. They actually could use an interior rusher, as crazy as that sounds. The way they think, they would look for another interior rusher, just add to the mix.
No, I agree. And I think that I know that me saying Myles Garrett probably sounds outlandish. The reality is they're going to look for more Zach Bonds. I think that you nailed it in that conversation you had with Bo last week, where I think they bring Zach Bond back. I think that that's a guy that you can't replace necessarily. I think that on one hand, yeah, you do want to stack the interior rushers, but in terms of paying them like Milton Williams, I'm like, I kind of think that the same way Mekhi Becton, probably the easiest right guard job in the league, to get coached by Jeff Stoutland and be part of that. I'm like, it's replaceable at right guard for Becton. You know, you got Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis there. I'm like, that third spot is going to be a turn. Like, that's a place that you're going to be able to cycle guys in and out, you know. And so I think that those are spots that they want to keep investing there. But I think Tyler Steen can fill in for Becton at right guard. I think that, I mean, frankly, there's a lot of defensive tackles in this draft. I wouldn't be shocked if what they really do is if the Eagles move up in the draft. Like, don't forget, Quinton Mitchell, they moved up to get Cooper DeJean with Washington, which no one talks about. But there's a Chiefs-Bills dynamic where how do they, you know, the Chiefs facilitated the Mahomes trade up with the Bills. I can't believe Washington could have had Cooper DeJean and probably didn't have him for medicals. But I think that the Eagles moving up for a very popular defensive line prospect in this draft, you know what I mean? I think that's something that I could see happening.
Yeah, they have 3 fifth-round picks, so they could use that to move up a little bit. They're a little tighter to the cap than they normally are, but they can make that work. They can move things around. Like, what they won't do is just like run it back. This is not a run it back type of offseason. We've talked a lot about them, but like they're easy wins. When I was thinking like, well, what's the easy wins for them? They can open up so much cap space because of those Hurts and AJ Brown rather, and Devontae Smith deals. So all you have to do is restructure. That's where the owners that actually want to spend to win make a difference. That's why your Giants are selling 10% of the team to get a little cash, because they don't have as much cash as guys like Jeffrey Lurie. It's why Jeffrey Lurie already did this, and they're spending that cash. They're selling it to these investors. It's this new NFL rule where you can open it up and then you suddenly get cash, and then you give Hurts and Brown a bunch of guaranteed money, and then you spend it. So if you're looking at the two, it sounds crazy to say, but probably the 2 thinnest positions this roster is so good is probably... It's probably the defensive line. Like, it's the edge rusher.
It's funny to say after watching the Super Bowl.
I know, but Brandon Graham might retire or as a free agent. Like, does he come back? I don't know. And then, so their best edge rushers right now are Nolan Smith and Jalix Hunt. So that's a position I think they'll want to address, and it's a position that's pretty wide open. And then defensive tackle, Jordan Davis is nice, but I think you're going to want another maybe difference maker with him. So it's like, I can totally see them going big on someone. Maybe they're a Jonathan Allen team if the Commanders were bold enough to do something like that, or a Trey Hendrickson team. They're going to do something. They might do a couple somethings. Watch out. How he's feeling himself.
I think that I know I sound like I'm kidding about Myles Garrett, but I do think that them just adding another force mold. I think it's the same concept as the Saquon thing, where like Trey Hendrickson, you can lead the league in sacks for the Bengals, but you don't make the playoffs. But you add him to this defensive line, he actually gets better. And Saquon with the offensive line, it's very similar. Where, you know, just stacking. Myles Garrett would be better on the Eagles than he ever was on the Browns. Probably, maybe the counting stats wouldn't be as good, but like his impact would probably be better than it ever was. And so I kind of think Trey Hendrickson actually makes a lot of sense to me if the Bengals are interested in moving him. But overall, I agree. The Eagles, they're not going to run it back. And unfortunately, they're better at this than everyone, which is crushing.
They're really set up to do well, and yet they're also, it's tough to handle a Super Bowl championship. They did an okay job of it last time. That team they ran back had a chance to make some noise in the playoffs when they came back. Didn't happen for them, but they were a decent team. I think they might struggle. Like Jalen Hurts feeling himself, everyone's going to be feeling themselves. Yeah. I think it could be tough. I
hear you, but I also think this Eagles team is the Legion of Boom reincarnated. I think this defense is exactly like the Legion of Boom, the first one, when everyone's about to get famous and everyone knows their names. I think Jalen Hurts is in a lot of ways the new Russell Wilson, different style, but like very similar, where the offense is his offense. He's a human cliche. Everyone looks up to him. There's kind of a weird dynamic, but as long as they're winning, it's fine. And I think that they have a lot in common. All they're missing is the nickname for this defense. And I there's no ceiling on this team for next season.
Ooh, I'm excited. We're going to have Colleen Wolfe on our show on Tuesday. We're going to be back in the studio. We're going to get her thoughts on the Charm Life. We've been having a lot of Eagles here, so I'm glad we're getting the NFC East out of the way. If we didn't hit your team today, we're hitting them all eventually, but we do got to hear from Colleen what it was like. She just went to the parade as a fan. I don't even think she worked for NFL Network. I saw her flying there, and I was like, oh, she must be working. I don't even think they put her on air. She was just out there getting drunk like everyone else. The Eagles Charm Life. I'm looking forward to it. Danny Heifetz, always a pleasure. We'll see you in Indianapolis. Let's get a beer. Let's do something there.
We'll do that. We're gonna save the Sinner talk for Indy. We'll go live and just give Sinner.
What do you? Yes, they suspended the number one tennis player in the world for doping violations, but it just happened to coexist in like the 3 months of the calendar that doesn't include a Grand Slam. It's little.
Does it bother you, or do you not care?
It doesn't really bother me. I mean, his excuse that he was getting massaged and it was like on the hands of the massagers. I just hate when the worst people in the world and in the sport are the ones that are the maddest about it, which is like Nick Kyrgios and Djokovic. So that immediately makes me think like, I don't want Jannik Sinner gone for a year or two. So I'm fine with it. I don't know. I don't know what to think. What do you think?
Kyrgios, I kind of think he's the next McEnroe. His commentary is really good. I'm kind of.
He is good, but he does enough that annoys me that now I'm kind of sick of him.
I don't blame you.
But yes, I won't get to see him when I go to Indian Wells in a couple weeks. So I'll miss Jannik Sinner there. All right, play the music, Eric. Let's get out of here. I don't know what more to say. I can barely speak. Heifetz is the man. Like I said, check out the Ringer Fantasy Football Show with him, Danny Kelly, Craig Horvath. It's great impressions. I will be back, like I mentioned, in the studio with Jordan Rodriguez, The Athletic, and Colleen Wolfe. And yes, when we're gassing up the Eagles again, you know it's Gregg season. See you next time.